Welcome back to another edition of the Deep Cover Podcast. I'm your host, Omar Zaran. Thank you, as always, for joining me for another edition of the show. Today, it might be a miracle. Two times in a month that I'm talking baseball with someone. I don't normally cover baseball, as anyone who listens knows, but I've been really recently just put in touch with these great commentators, these great analysts that I feel really have a lot of cool things to talk about. So joining me today is JoJo Mueller. She is the co-host of Good to See You with Coach Karl and Joey Blue, where they cover everything Dodgers and sports intersectional, but mostly Dodgers. And it is baseball season. The Dodgers are off to a great start. As of recording this, they are 4-0 with a game against Detroit later on tonight. So first of all, JoJo, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I'm really, really excited to be here. Guest on someone else's podcast, so I'm pretty stoked about it.
Hey, the thing is, for me, it's always an open door, and we were talking before we start recording. JoJo and I have a mutual love of reading, so already a lot of common thread DNA there. So I kind of want to start, and we're going to talk a lot about your experience as a fan, a lot about your podcast and covering the Dodgers and the Dodgers themselves, of course. But
Sure.
Kind of day one, walk me through it. What got you into baseball and the Dodgers specifically? What was that moment that turned you into a fan?
Okay, so I didn't really have a lot of choice in the matter. My dad grew up in Pasadena, and him and my mom were both graduates of Bassett High School, and he grew up going to games with his dad. And so when I was the first memory I have is going to Dodger Stadium with my dad. I was about 5. And so I didn't really have a lot of, like I said, I didn't have a lot of choice in the matter. I was born into being a Dodger fan. I live in Las Vegas, and I grew up in Boulder City. And I'm a little bit older, and back in the day, the Dodgers weren't on TV out here. And so we would listen to the games a lot. So I grew up listening to Vin Scully. I grew up going to games with my dad and my grandma, where my grandmother would have her headphones on so she could listen to Vin call the games when we were at the games themselves. And so I didn't have a lot of choice in the matter. It's just something I was born into. I'm an only child. I was very close with both of my parents, but my dad and I have always connected about baseball and the Dodgers in specifically the Dodgers. I went through a rebellious phase when I was 16, and I followed the Braves for a year because it was Chipper Jones' rookie year. And I really feel like he was robbed that year of Rookie of the Year. It went to Hideo Nomo, actually won Rookie of the Year that year, which technically Nomo wasn't a rookie because he had played professional ball in Japan. Right. So I did go through a little bit of a rebellious phase, but my dad and I, he took me that was like a huge part, and it's still very much part of my life. My husband and I now go to games every year. He's really into baseball too now. When we started dating, he wasn't. But for me, it's always just been like part of who I am. Back in 2008, I started writing a blog. It was more like kind of an online catch-all for life and life things and Dodger baseball and things like that. And so, it's just always been a part of me. I love sports in general, but my heart beats baseball. It forever will. I love Los Angeles. I'm wearing my I Love LA shirt. Even though I'm born and raised in Vegas, it's just LA is my second home. I love it out there. So yeah, man, Dodger baseball has always been, I don't know my life without it.
It's funny. You talk about like growing up listening to someone as iconic as Vin Scully.
Yeah.
It really accelerates your fandom. And one thing about my show, all too far often, I somehow bring it back to my favorite basketball team, the New York Knicks. And it reminds me of, like, growing up, the Knicks had Marv Albert calling games for MSG. So whenever I'm watching Patrick Ewing, I'm hearing Marv Albert call those games. And now, this generation currently, we have Mike Breen and Clyde Frazier. So again, 2 Hall of Fame broadcasters. And I always feel like that matters when you're listening, because especially like NBA is really bad about this. I think local baseball might be bad about it too. It's just like some of these announcers are just like such homers, and it's just like, yeah, it's just like, okay, can we be a little professional? And then you have somebody like on the level that Vince Scully was, and it's just hard to, it's hard to replicate that. So I'm sure you experienced this where if you listen to another broadcast, it just doesn't hit the same, right?
It doesn't. So a couple things there. Funny thing is, my husband, huge Knicks fan, huge.
Hey, good people.
So I don't basketball. So my order of sports goes baseball, hockey, football, basketball. And I don't care about basketball one way or the other. I've always, like the Lakers, Magic Johnson, LA, what have you. But my husband's a Knicks fan, so let's go Knicks. And for the same reason, he, growing up in Las Vegas, both of us are from here. We didn't have a professional sports team like of the big four until the Vegas Golden Knights got here, until the NHL expanded and we had the Vegas Golden Knights. So you'll find a lot of people from Vegas that are really big fans of teams from everywhere else because we had to kind of cherry pick it. So he's a big Knicks fan. And so that's awesome that you're a Knicks fan too. Yes, the announcing situation since Vince Scully retired and has since passed away is brutal. Nobody does it like him. Nobody, and nobody ever will. That just the way he painted a picture. So there's a series, there's a sequence of pitches. You can probably catch it on YouTube where Vin's calling Madison Bumgarner's pitching. And Vin, I don't know how he knows everything about everyone, but he's telling a story about Bumgarner growing up on a farm and living on a farm or whatever with his wife. And there was a rattlesnake that was like trying to eat a bunny, and Bumgarner catches the snake, saves the bunny, and Vin never misses a beat. He's calling each pitch. Like, that's outside the way. And there's just nobody like, I'm getting the chills just thinking about what it was like to listen to him. Right. Clayton Kershaw threw his no-hitter, and this was back when we had the Dodgers played on, they would air their games out here. So before Sportsnet became the thing, we had the Dodgers and the Angels on channels 49 and 50. And so I was able to watch Dodger games. And when Kershaw threw his no-no, there's just this beauty of listening to Vin call it and go, okay, I'm going to sit back and just watch this and enjoy this with the rest of you. And you felt like you were there with him. So yeah, it was a beautiful thing to be growing up and have Grandpa Vin be part of like my story. Right. And there's every Dodger fan feels that way, that grew up listening to Vin Scully. Oral Hershiser and Joe Davis do a good job. But literally watching the World Series and listening to not for nothing, I loved John Smoltz as a pitcher, but as an announcer, my God.
Some people got it, some people don't.
It's just so hard to listen to. I think A-Rod, and this is their analyst now, but, A-Rod does a good job.
I do like what he does. He obviously super maligned as a player, but, it's his analysis for, I think when he was working for ESPN or whatever, has always been pretty good, I think.
Pretty good, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So.
It's funny because you mentioned, I swear this is my last broadcaster thing because I could go on for an hour about broadcasting, but I think the genius of Vin is that, when you're calling games in the pitch clock era, there's a lot of gap, right? You have to be able to fill in the gaps, and so often you would see, it's kind of almost like dead air while you're waiting for the pitch to come. And so to be able to kind of storytell and weave in calling what's happening is it's a gift that so many people take for granted. And that's what makes him the best. It's just like, you can't get over it. I want to kind of dial into your podcast real quick here.
Absolutely.
So I guess a lot of people start podcasts for different reasons. I initially started mine as a reason to just vent to a camera for 20 minutes or so. And so obviously you have a co-host. So
I do.
What was the idea of that coming together?
So Carl and I have been friends for 18, 19 years. And he's a huge Dodger fan. So am I. He coached. So he's coached everything from T-ball up to high school. You know, and his sons played. He's a huge baseball fan, huge Dodger fan, has a lot of knowledge about the game. He's also very logical. I am not. And I am a very emotional. I would keep every Dodger ever since that. Like, one of my favorite pitchers was Jeff Weaver, not Jared, not his brother, the Cy Young winner, but Jeff, right? And
Yes.
so it's really funny, like, how we approach the game, we approach the players with completely different perspectives. And if you give us a listen, you'll understand. We're both really snarky, and we play well off of one another, and we always have really good conversations about the game, about the players, about the new rules and things like that. He's, you know, he comes from a place of coaching where I'm a fan of the pitch clock. I am a fan of stopping the shift. I am a fan of the automatic balls and strikes. Like, I'm here for it. Let's get it together, right? And so we approach it differently there. We're recording for starting our third season. We took a break after October, and we're starting our third season next week. So, but if you give us a listen, and our episodes are short, we're 35, 40 minutes tops. And we cover everything. We don't get into politics. We don't get into too much of like what's going on in the world. We do as it relates to sports. So one of the big things that we talked about last season was the deaths of Johnny and Matthew Gaudreau, and how, you know, like, it's really important to not drink and drive, right? And so I don't even know how many people listen to us. Like, he checks our stats a lot. I really don't. It was more for me. I love baseball, man, and I've loved the Dodgers my whole life, and I want to talk about it. And that's what I do. So we look at it, we come from it. We come from a place of going, it's two friends talking about the game, and we'll see who listens. And we always kind of make a joke about, oh, maybe the 15 people that listen to us will, you know, whatever. But we try and keep it baseball Dodger focused.
Yeah, I think that balance is so important. It reminds me, I used to so before I covered sports, I kind of tried my hand at covering tech for a while before it became a conflict of interest in my day job. And and I hosted this podcast with my friend Creston, and he was kind of like you, right? You know, just like very passionate about it, and I was kind of the more kind of level-headed version. And so what that allows you kind of play off of each other.
Yeah.
And it's a good dynamic, because if you have two people who are just too level-headed, it's kind of boring. And then if you have two people that, you know, aren't, then it kind of gets a little chaotic, you know, so you have to find the balance, right?
Yeah.
And I do want to kind of touch on, you mentioned how you kind of stick mostly to sports and don't get too political. I find myself doing that as well, but sometimes things seep in. And do you think it's just kind of more focusing on the escapism aspect that sports can provide? Because, you know, if you're super dialed in to politics and stuff, you know, it becomes real depressing real quick.
Yeah.
And I always feel like, I look at it like, I do writing and I do this podcast, and I always look at it as my writing and my podcast, for anybody that reads or listens, is really more for somebody to take a 5-minute break from the world that we're in. Do you kind of take a similar approach, or what's your thought?
We do, however, and then like in my personal life, like, you can't ignore what's going on.
Of course, yeah.
And sports have always been political. So there's this crowd of like, keep politics out of sports, keep politics out of books, keep politics out of music, all this stuff, right? But like, the reality is I believe it was, and I can't remember who it was in the Olympics. I want to say Tommy Brown, when he raised his fist up, and was like blacklisted for that, right? And sports has always been political. You can't have fighter jets flying over, doing flyovers and military appreciation nights without it. You know, like, and then art, the same thing, has always been political. The Navy used Top Gun as a recruitment tool. And I love that movie, right? And I absolutely support our military, and I love it, you know, getting our recruitment numbers up so we don't have to institute the draft. Great. You know, but because politics is so divisive now, and people's rights are at stake, and things like that. So we can't really ignore it. But our focus is we don't want to alienate anybody, and we want to give people a chance to like come together over something. Right. And so, the umpire, Angel Hernandez, right?
Yes.
He was terrible. Terrible. One of the worst. Him and Joe West, awful, right? And here's the caveat to that is, why do I know umpires' names? I shouldn't know that. You shouldn't be so fucking bad at your job that I know your name. So the last year when Hernandez retired, literally like everybody across, I'm like, I figured out the thing that's going to unite us, right? The thing that's going to unite
the
us
retirement of this umpire
is Angel Hernandez not calling games anymore, right? And it was like, so I think that sports has the ability to really like bring people together. And we just don't want it. Yeah, it's okay to take a break sometime and then get re-engaged. And I just think that that's important. It's important that we do that. Otherwise we're going to go, I mean, if I don't take breaks from, calling my senators or writing letters, or I'm going to end up on a mountain alone, like so I have to keep my sanity where I can find it.
I think that's the beauty of it, right? It's because it is inherently political. Like you think about one of the greatest athletes of all time, Muhammad Ali, was incredibly political, right? And like that's just one of many examples. Obviously, you have a lot more modern examples as well on really both sides of the political spectrum. Athletes make statements all the time. Teams have actions that lean one way or the other. But at the same time, it's still the great unifier, right? It's still, going to a game and the commonality of rooting for your team or just enjoying a sport. And it's what and I think, we all kind of have to lean into that, right? Because if we don't, and we just say, oh, just focus on, the whole, like, shut up and dribble.
Shut up and dribble,
yeah. And it's just kind of like, it's so misguided because, like you said, sports have been political since the days of Athenian Olympics,
Exactly.
So it's always been that case.
You can go back, and you touched on Jackie Robinson earlier. You want to talk about like sports being political? Like Jackie was the original of that. I wrote a book report about Jackie Robinson when I was in the 3rd grade, because he was and is a hero of mine, and breaking the color barrier and doing what he did, even though like the Negro League was alive and strong, and just what he did for the game and what he went through, that has to be, that's a political thing, right? That has to be acknowledged. That has to be honored. And you can't say that like, oh, just stick to sports. Not when it's something like that. Not when an entire race was kept out of the game.
100%. And that's where it's like, you can't cherry pick that, right? That's a big thing. Focusing on the Dodgers here, the current day Dodgers, we'll actually get more into Jackie Robinson in a second.
Sure.
They're on top of the world right now, right? They're a premier organization in MLB, in sports globally as well. I find it interesting as somebody who I partially cover the Knicks, and for the longest time, the Knicks have been pretty bad, and now they're actually a pretty good team, but they're also not considered to be a top flight organization, right? What's it like covering a team that's this good?
Okay, so you have to remember, and this is the thing that I wish, and I guess it's just the Dodgers fans, it's our turn to take licks, right? Because for years it was the Yankees, but the Dodgers weren't good for a really long time. Yeah. They had no World Series appearances from 88 onward until 2017 against the cheating ass Astros. And so, which I'll never forgive, because they robbed Andre Ethier of his ring. We ran Yu Darvish out of town. Yeah. I digress. Any hoodles. We had no World Series appearances in that amount of time. And then we had the McCourt years, where they literally sold off the team for parts, pretty much, so that they could fund. There's so much weird shit around the McCourts. But like the wife was like getting guidance from psychics and buying crystals, and a lot of their funds were going to that. They got rid of Paul LaDuca. Sean Green, who is one of my absolute, he is my it's hard for me to pick a favorite Dodger, but Sean Green's the one that I can never, every time I see him, I can't speak. And we see him, he's at Dodger Stadium a lot. And like, oh, well, my dad will always say hello and shake his hand. And I'm like, I can't even say anything. But yeah, so they traded away. We had a lot of really hard years with the McCourts during the McCourt era, and the Dodgers were not always good. They've always been a marquee name and presence and a very historical team since bringing the team over from Brooklyn. And you have, Jackie Robinson, Sandy Koufax. You have these legendary players and what have you. But for, a good 20 years, they weren't good. They weren't good. And so now we have when MLB, and this is, I don't know why I've really just never liked, I can't stand Rob Manfred. I don't even know if he likes the game of baseball, but Bud Selig before him, one of the things that MLB did that was really good was force the McCourts to sell that team. And the best thing ever was getting an ownership group that was going to invest in this team and bring championships back to the city of Los Angeles. The Dodgers, they're a marquee franchise. They're the second biggest market in the game besides the Yankees. You have to put a product on the field that's going to honor that. So it's pretty wild to go from worst to first and see like the fruits of all these years of labor. And then I have people that are like, oh, your ownership and buying everybody. Listen. Every team, every sports team has an owner. And if you own a sports team, you have the ability to do what the Dodgers are doing. They're just cheap and choose not to.
I agree. 100%.
I will die on that hill, especially in baseball, because there's no salary cap. So you have to pay a luxury tax. So what? But I will die on the hill that every team can do what the Dodgers are doing. Look at the Mets.
Yep, exactly. The Mets are the perfect example. Like you'll see like people like I think like Pirates fans are like this a lot when it comes to the Dodgers. Like, oh, poor little us, blah, blah, blah. Like all these teams are owned by billionaires, right? It's just, it's not this mom and pop shop situation that people make it out to be. And in a weird way, it reminds me like whenever there's advocacy for an increase in minimum wage, we're always so angry at the fast food worker. Whereas, why are we not mad at the billionaire? For like, if you make certain amount of money and you're mad at a fast food worker getting a pay bump, you're like, well, I only make this much more. Why aren't you mad at the billionaire who signs your paychecks, right? And it's just like,
I agree.
That's exactly what it feels like to me. It's like, oh, it's not fair. The Dodgers, Yankees, and Mets, big markets, getting all these guys. Like, how much money does your owner have available? Why are they not investing into this team?
Right.
Because sports teams, it's kind of like a foolproof investment if you have the money, because you look at like the Boston Celtics just got sold for $6 billion. The previous owner, when they bought that team, they bought it for $300 million.
Yeah.
So like the return on investment for a sports franchise only goes up. It doesn't matter what league, it's just like, It's not just the NFL. Like MLB, even MLS franchises continue to increase in value. So I do have a question about this, though, from a content perspective.
Sure.
I always did think it's more fun or better content, I guess, when the team is bad, because you're criticizing ownership, you're talking about rookies, you're looking towards the future, and that creates better content, more interesting content. As a fan, it's worse because you're watching your team lose.
Right.
Whereas when they're good, it's like, all right, what are we really talking about? So like, oh, they won another game. Sick. Oh, they're in the playoffs yet again. Awesome. So what's the difference for that from when you looking at it from you're just talking about it on a podcast perspective? How do you find ways to make this team that's really good now seem interesting on a week by week or month by month basis?
We're very erratic with our schedule. So we'll do like twice a month. We'll do like every other week. Sometimes it's once a month, what have you. It depends on both of us. We're both busy, married, working people, right? Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that we talk about is, okay, so you've got the Dodgers that they've won, I think, 11 of their 12 NOS, the last NOS titles, right? Mm-hmm. And the one year that they didn't win the title was our wild card, the CS series against the Giants. Mm-hmm. And that series was outstanding. It should have been the championship series instead of just the division. But that year was the Giants and the Dodgers going. And I kept expecting the Giants to fall off, right? I kept expecting the Giants to go, this can't hold. They can't win 118 games, but they did. And we won 117, whatever. It was such a great season for that rivalry and for the game. So we talk about stuff like that. We talk about Shohei and going 50-50, which is unreal. And then going to games and seeing the effect that Shohei Ohtani has, it's like nothing I've ever seen before. Dodger Stadium's always busy. It's always been busy. It's never been busy like this. It has never been busy like this. And I've been there on opening day. I've been there, for just all kinds of different things. I've never seen like the games this packed on a random Wednesday. Even when we my husband and I like to go to Disneyland. I don't know if he really likes it, but I like it. And so he takes me and it's a blast. So we go every year. And last year we went in September and we were staying in Anaheim and the Dodgers were playing the Angels. And there was like a huge group, like busloads of Dodger fans there to see Shohei, there to see if he's gonna hit another home run tonight. You know what I mean? So on our podcast, we talk about things like that. And then before they started like winning, we talk about why can't they close the deal, right? Mm-hmm. So why can we get to a division series? Why can we get to a championship series and then lose it? And then the wheels fall off. And honestly, Omar, last year I expected the wheels to fall off. We limped into the postseason. Here's the thing about baseball. No one's going 162-0. Nobody. Right. And you're not – every team's going to slump. Every team's going to have injuries. And so for the Dodgers last year, we limped into the playoffs with three starting pitchers and a bullpen held together by duct tape and chicken wire. Like there was no reason they should have won the world. There was no reason. The Padres should have taken us out. Mm-hmm. And then they got cute and they didn't, and then the Mets were another situation. And then it was like, okay, now we're going to play the Yankees who are like this giant, right? You've got Giancarlo Stanton and Aaron Judge and Garrett Cole, and you've got all these heavy hitters and Juan Soto. And so for me as a lifelong fan, there's part of me that was really excited. And then the other part of me goes, if you've ever seen Major League when Randy Quaid, they're going to blow it in the playoffs. That was me. I'm like, every single series, I expected them to just lose it. So that's the kind of stuff we talk about. Even when you're winning, there's still something to bitch about, man. Like,
right. Yeah, and I kind of see that again. I keep on bringing up the Knicks, but it's just because I cover them now. So that's kind of the situation with us. We're third in the East, and and the team is on pace to win 50 games, and the 82-game season is pretty good. And people are like, oh, well, the coach is this, and we got to do this. We have a second round ceiling in the playoffs, and you almost forget that you're in the good old days, right. While they're happening. Right. And I guess from your perspective, is you had 20 years of not being good, and so there's some perspective that comes with that. I want to talk now about the Jackie Robinson stuff, which is, recently in the current presidential administration's zeal, I guess, to scrub anything that's diversity, equity, and inclusion, they kind of scrubbed the records of Jackie Robinson's military service. Mm-hmm. And which to me has to be like scrubbing stuff like that and erasing Black names and all that from government websites is already horrific. But to do it for somebody who's such a symbol of anti-racism in American history, he's probably if not the most, on the very short list of most important athletes of the 20th century in American mm-hmm. sports. So what was your reaction when that happened? when, of all the people to scrub something from, it was Jackie fucking Robinson.
It was egregious. It was egregious, like most things that this administration does. And and they put it back because they, like everything else, they have to backtrack because they're doing this shit that's so wildly unpopular that they're getting so much pushback, which I'm so glad that there is a resistance and that people are pushing back on these archaic and insane policies that they're trying to do. So I don't know if you've ever read 1984 by George Orwell, which you should before it gets completely banned. But it talks about, and Rage Against the Machine mentioned this in their lyrics, but it's he who controls the past controls the future, and he who controls the present controls the past. And so what they're doing now in trying to erase these, that's why it's important that we take notes, right? We take pictures and we log the things that are happening because in a generation or two, it might not be there. So I think it's important that we keep pushing back, but it was fucking egregious. And just from that perspective of going, I don't even think that they realize that they're doing it. I think that they're just, they're trying to, what I think is that these policies that they're doing and things that are so unpopular, they're trying to do as much damage as they can before the midterms in 2026. And because they know that like the more that they institute these things and the more that people push back on them and the more that people wake up to what's happening, because the problem is, and I've never been a political person. I just wasn't until he came down that golden escalator in 2015.
Which tells you everything, right? Because it's so egregious that it forces somebody who wasn't super vocal about politics to become a lot more vocal about politics. But go ahead.
I was a registered independent for years because I voted both ways for a long time. And because we had responsible Republicans like Mitt Romney and John McCain that weren't crazy. And now that the Republican Party has been taken over by the Tea Party and the Heritage Foundation, it's this perfect storm of like tech bros and the religious right, and have taken over the Republican Party. So where the Democrats or any other country would be considered center or right wing even. But yeah, it's been, it's been crazy. That's why I read books, man. That's why I travel and go to games and listen to music and watch movies and things like that. Cause I need to give my brain a break sometimes, but, I'm one person and can't do everything. So I do the things, I use apps like, 5calls.org, which is to call my senators, and, they even give you a really good script. I use ResistBot. I encourage my friends that are in other states to do the same. Yeah, so I use my library. I talk about these things with people that are willing to listen. And then because we got to get back to sanity. But the Jackie Robinson thing, it was painful. Even though like I'm a white girl from the whitest part of Nevada, right, which is Boulder City, home of Hoover Dam and Lake Mead. Like there's not a whole lot of people of color there. And even though I'm from there, my parents didn't raise me to think about only my race. That makes sense. I grew up in the 80s and 90s, so it was different then. And like I said, I wrote this book report on Jackie when I was in the 3rd grade. My dad still has it. And I have the book that I wrote it on, which is like a badge of courage. And it talked about, in the mind for an elementary schooler, what Jackie went through. My grandmother, who was alive during the Depression, talked about that time in the civil rights movement and things like that. My parents talk about it. So for me, I've always known what's right and what's not as far when it comes to race and things like that. And I think that diversity, equity, inclusion makes us better. And one of the things too is, and I think that this falls under, women are the biggest benefit of DEI, right? So it wasn't until 1974 that women could have credit cards in their name.
Right.
And so that's a big deal. Like my mother, when she was in high school, protested so that women could wear pants to school. And this was in the 60s.
Crazy.
Pants, Omar. Like, you don't take away you'll pry my jeans out of my cold dead hands. Like, I can't imagine a world when I couldn't wear pants, or that men couldn't have long hair. You know, that's the kind of stuff that my parents like had sit-ins for. So for me, I carry that with me.
And the thing specifically when it comes to Jackie Robinson, when when you look into race relations and struggles, and you look into the civil rights movement and what it took to get the acts kind of put through law and all that, he was kind of like, this was the one thing we could, a lot of people like a sanitized vision of history, right? And
sure,
you could kind of like, what happened to Jackie was terrible and is extremely underreported, the way he was treated after, the color barrier was broken. But at the time, baseball was the all-American sport. And so to be able to have that integration, it was such a huge deal. And as a result, of course, his number is retired by every single MLB team, and he is revered. And it's almost like that's somebody that should be untouchable when it comes to preserving their history, right? It almost is like if you're trying to like diminish what Gandhi did. I feel like, if from the lens of an international scope,
right?
For Dodgers fans in particular, I guess you guys have a bigger attachment and a bigger claim to Jackie Robinson than the other fan bases. So, what is his history, his legacy, his breakthrough? Kind of, what does that mean to you guys?
So I can't speak for every Dodger fan ever, but I hold it. And again, I'm speaking from a place of a wild amount of privilege, right? Mm-hmm. I am a white woman who has never had to. I don't suffer from racism. I don't know what it's like to be afraid of the police. I've never feared for my life getting pulled over. So for me, it's hard I don't feel like I can say, oh, this is what it means to every Dodger fan, because the Dodgers have a complicated history too. So they have, Chavez Ravine, they ripped Mexican families out of their home to build that ballpark. And then it wasn't until Fernando Valenzuela came and Fernando Mania happened during the late 70s, early 80s, that the Hispanic fan base started to come back to the Dodgers. So I think it's important that for me, it's a badge of honor that Jackie was ours. But I can't talk about what it means because I have never experienced any amount of racism or othering the way that most Dodger fans have. I can only know that I feel proud that he was a Dodger and that they continue to honor his legacy. And so same thing with Fernando Valenzuela. I feel proud that he was a Dodger and that his legacy has continued to be honored. And I think to bring it back to the beginning, when we're talking about Vin Scully, Vin was there during that. And so I think, how Vin wove all of that together was beautiful. And I think it's one of the things like you talked about being the great uniter. But I know that every Dodger fan that I know feels honored when it's Jackie Robinson Day, Mm-hmm. And then when his family comes out at Dodger Stadium or they'll throw out the first pitch and things like that. And I just think it's really important. I think it's very important that we continue to talk about his legacy and talk about what he means to the game.
It's something where America's history with rights for all people, it has been incredibly messy, incredibly, it's the nicest way to say it, right? You could use a lot of other terms, but it's been just a lot. There's a lot of scars there, and no franchise, I think, is immune from that. Even newer ones like that were formulated in the 80s and 90s, none of them are, because yet again, I've found a way to weave the Knicks into a comment here. But I was recently doing for Black History Month, I did a piece about the 1980 Knicks, which was the first all-black roster in NBA history.
Okay.
And now this is 1980, right? This isn't 1940. And so it's in New York City, a very progressive place, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where instead of calling them the Knickerbockers, they use N-word bockers, right? To describe them. And, and it's kind of like ties into what was a pride product of the Reagan era and all that. So the Knicks later on had the first all-black front office. That should be celebrated, as should the first all-black roster. But also, it takes into account that a lot of these teams, like MSG, held a Nazi rally in the 30s. And you can't escape that. That's etched in stone, basically, right? And I think being aware of it is so important because you have to know where you came from, how to overcome the sins of the past. And I could speak to you so I'm half Palestinian. And
okay.
So my American experience post 9/11 is a lot different than a lot of other people, So like for the longest time, getting through TSA at the airport was a disaster. The double take when people see your name and all that is a disaster. And I don't have it worse than a lot of people, but I've experienced it, right? And so I think like telling those stories really matters. I recently wrote a piece about the relationship between Adidas and Arab people.
I read that.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's good to know somebody reads my stuff.
I was like, yeah, I'll check this out.
Yeah, and it's just like there's connective tissue there, and there's a lot of like in that example, Adidas still has done a lot of good for Arab people. I love Adidas. I wear their stuff all the time.
Yeah,
but also you can't take away the bad that company has done, and I think that's context that's super important when it comes to that sort of thing.
And I agree with you. I think as like with sports, always our country as a whole, always, and it has to be. I think what's happening now is so there's always been pendulum swings, right? And so what we're seeing now with this fascism that's happening and these destruction of institutions and wanting to take over the Smithsonian and things like that. I think what's happening is this is the last gasp of a dying movement, right? And people feeling like they're losing rights and things like that. And the only way that they can hold on to them is by taking it away from other people. And so what's happening is there are more of us than there are of them. They're just louder. And they have a lot of, money behind it. But I think the world as a whole, and it isn't just the United States, Canada has a huge problem with their native population and their own reckoning to come to terms with. And America does too. So, we live in a country and on stolen land that was built on the backs of stolen people. And nobody wants to acknowledge that, right? So I don't know if you've seen the HBO series The Watchmen.
I have. Yeah.
Okay. That was the first time, I'm 46 years old. That was the first time that I learned about Black Wall Street. My husband knew about it in his school. They taught it. His history teacher taught it to him. I didn't. I didn't know that, right? So I had to like, holy shit. And so then I started like doing research and looking things up and realizing, oh my gosh. And then I also knew about, if you go in the 80s, with the explosion of crack cocaine in African-American neighborhoods. So that's Reagan, right? And and when we go back to our mental health population, why we have so many unhoused on the streets that have mental health issues and we put them in jail. Okay, so now we've got for-profit prisons. Well, Ronald Reagan closed our mental institutions. Not that they were great, they needed reform. And I think what's happening now with our government, with Doge coming in, and Elon Musk, who's an unelected person who's taking a literal chainsaw to things that needed to be done with a scalpel. A lot of our institutions need reform. not to just be hacked to pieces. And there's this whitewashing happening because our past is painful and people don't want to reckon it. Am I responsible for what 6 generations before me did? No, I'm not. But I am responsible to help make the changes going forward so that it doesn't happen again. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it's just like I often say history is often written by the victor, right? Or by the oppressor, if you will. And so when you read about something, it's often going to be presented in a way that makes it feel favorable to the person who's in power. And so it's important to really look at the real-time education, real-time reporting. It's why I think, like media and journalists, and they get a really bad rap these days because of, the fake news and clickbait and all these terms that have been really popularized in this last decade. But I think reporting on stuff and finding angles and uncovering, investigating, that sort of thing is incredibly important, because I think about my experience again post 9/11. And it's why I'm working like on the side a kind of long form project about the aftermath of that moment. And it's just like, because a lot of people forget. Like, I saw somebody share the TikTok with me of former President Bush at a Rangers game, and I was just like, they're just kind of, he's kind of turned into like this kind of goofy old guy. And I'm just like I lived through the consequences of his presidency.
Right.
And you could argue it's the consequences of Dick Cheney's presidency, if you really wanted to get down to brass tacks. But I think it's, time allows us to kind of gloss over a lot of stuff. And I shudder to think, if the year is 2046 and we're looking back at this era 20 years after it happened, is it somehow going to be sane washed? Is my thing. And I think having people who are vocally saying, no, this is what's happening, and making that readily available tells the real story. And it's something that in the past, like, we haven't had, because, the beauty of the internet age now is everybody could put whatever they want up there, right? And you could have a lot more shared experience that might have been derailed because of all the gates that kept so many people out.
You have this, we have everything that we'd ever wanted to know at our fingertips. And I think that's the difference between what's happening now as during the Bush years is, the 9/11, like, I was, 22 years old when that happened. And I was at my boyfriend at the time at his house. We thought the world was ending.
Yep.
We thought that we both worked at a restaurant on the Strip. We had never been so busy. I had never seen the Vegas airspace so quiet. So we lived through that. And then I remember President Bush throwing out the first pitch it was the Yankees-Mets game.
Yep. And
there was a rise of patriotism and love of country that I hadn't seen before. And, that attack on us accomplished what it was supposed to do, right? Our country was forever changed. We became very distrustful of anything other. And it was, again, there's this reckoning that has happened over the last 20 years, coming to terms with the actions that were taken, invading Iraq, which was completely unnecessary, and they weren't even the people responsible for it. And then we're in Afghanistan for 20 years. And now we've got things going on with Iran. There's a lot of saber rattling going on. And, it's just, it's a lot to wrap one's head around. And post 9/11, that we live in this fast information, but there's also confirmation bias. So people aren't looking for the truth. They're looking for what is going to validate their bias or response. Right. So if I'm having a conversation with a conservative and I can point out an article or something that says, hey, here's this, and then they come back with, hey, here's this, and it's like, which side is correct? I tend to believe my side, and so my own confirmation bias is at play. And it's great that we have all this real-time information. However, is it correct?
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
We have a whole subset of people getting their information from Fox News or CNN, which to me is they're both propaganda outlets. So
I listened to a podcast recently. So it's a business podcast and it's called Business Wars. And they were kind of talking about the rise of Fox News and CNN and their rivalry in the 90s and leading up to the war in Afghanistan. And when you really see like the way they pursued stories, where there were stories that were just like where it became more entertainment value. And Fox went all the way to the end on that before CNN really decided to get into that space as well. Like for the longest time, CNN was like, well, we're a news station, you know, and eventually like, look, we're getting crushed by MSNBC and Fox News because they're leaning into the entertainment value, you know, and that becomes the problem. You know, how is it reported? How do you know what to trust and what not to trust? And it's an interesting, I'll do this last point because I do want to finish on some Dodgers stuff here. I know we've kind of gone off the rails, but it's okay. I do think we have this rise of independent journalism, and I'm probably, you know, you talked about confirmation bias. My own confirmation bias is somebody who who writes articles and stuff like that without being part of a bigger outlet. There's a lot of more independent journalism that you could argue is kind of trying to bridge that gap. But again, how much of the confirmation bias is there? That's where it really becomes a situation where, you know, do you trust this person or you trust that person? Or do we just all end up living in these echo chambers of people saying what we want to hear or positioning an opinion that we want to hear?
I think that's kind of the danger, right? One of the things, and I have friends, I have people in my life that are conservative, and we talk and we learn from one another, right? And
which is important, I think. It's something that a lot of people don't do.
We go on about our day. Like, I don't hate someone because they're a Republican. And I hope that they don't hate me because I'm a Democrat. Like, that's just stupid, right? So I think that there's most people want to just live a happy, healthy life, provide for their family, breathe clean air, and drink clean water. What's happening now is the craziest get the most views. It's clicks. Right. That I hate even using this term, but mainstream media, it's designed to keep us in fear. To keep us in fear, to keep us in front of the screen, things like that. But when you go out in the world, when you're among humans, and this is at games, right? My husband and I were season ticket holders for the Vegas Golden Knights up until this year. When you're out in the world and you're with your community and you're with people, this isn't what's happening, right? It's very, there are folks that have main character syndrome, and you can kind of see that. But for the most part, it's people just going about their lives. And I think that that's really what's happening in the current administration with all these gutting of social safety nets and all of these things. Nobody asked for this. Nobody wanted this. Nobody wanted to take over Greenland and Canada, for fuck's sake. Like, nobody wanted that. Even people that have voted for him on Reddit threads are like, this isn't what I wanted to do. Like, what even is this? So for me, I think that the more people that realize, like, hey, this isn't okay, and then they can get out and you know, take whatever action that they deem necessary to keep their family safe. And one of the things that I do, and this is what I tell my little circle, my hula hoop's very small. But the thing I try to do is just practice love and kindness in my area of the world. Like, I can't sew a quilt to cover the entire earth, right? I can just keep my corner. I can just keep sewing on my fabric of my corner of the world and practicing, you know, love and kindness and care for my fellow man. I know that sounds a little woo-woo and hippie-ish, but I was raised by hippies, so It
is what it is.
It is what it is. You know, I love all the universe's kids. Well, not all of them, but you know what I mean, right? So I try to seek the good in people, and even though right now things are really hard and they're really scary, and I'm just trying to keep my head above it and keep my corner okay. So thank God for baseball, man. We have we were able to get the Spectrum app through MLB TV because we're blacked out we're considered Dodgers territory out here in Vegas. So we got the MLB app and got the Spectrum app through that. And so I can now watch Dodger games like we're not blacked out. So I'm so excited about that. There's 140 games this year that I can watch on television. So I'm really excited about it.
You know,
like that and books and like keeping with my little community is keeping me sane. And then when I get when I get hemmed up or jammed up, I make those calls to my senator, write my letters, sign my petitions.
You know, you talked about Elon and Doge there briefly. I was reading a book recently called Extremely Hardcore by Zoe Schiffer. And so she's a tech journalist, and she talks about his takeover at Twitter and, of course, its eventual rebranding into X and just what that looked like on the inside. And she's, the authority on that, along with Casey Newton. And when you read it, it's the same playbook that he's using now. So it's all the same stuff. So if anybody is out there and wants to really understand how the thought process of this Doge stuff is working, check out that book. It's really good. I do want to talk about this is a rough pivot after what we just spent about 20 minutes talking about, but I kind of want to talk about the Dodgers as an international brand. So obviously they got Ohtani, they were just part of the Tokyo games against the Cubs. And talk about a meeting of two massive brands, by the way, the Cubs and the Dodgers. That's a huge deal. I used to go to Chicago for work all the time, and the Cubs are just a religion down there. So so they've had this. They've kind of become this international brand with Ohtani, and it has a huge Asian fan base, right? And Japanese and Korean and everything. And obviously in Japan and South Korea, baseball is huge. In addition to all the countries in Latin America. So, first of all, do you consider them an international brand like you would Real Madrid in soccer or something like that? Are they on that level in terms of international reach?
I would say so. If you go back to the Dodgers getting Raul Mondesi, that was a big deal. Same thing with Hideo Nomo. That was the start of it, and Fernando Valenzuela, same deal. So I think that again, it goes back to the Shohei effect, and he's the biggest star to ever come out of Japan. But then you've got Yoshinbu Yamamoto, who I don't know if you watched the game at all last night or if you cared, but I mean, he gave up 2 home runs, but 10 strikeouts. I mean, he was just absolutely throwing heat. And then they won with they picked up, Roki Sasaki. And it's a huge deal. And so, I think that I also think that if you look at it's different from, we talk about South Korea, Hyunjin Ryu. And I think that the Dodgers I think that they set the tone for other teams to follow. I think that they continue to be, continue to pave the way and break barriers to recruit these players. The Dodgers have one of the best scouting teams in the game. And I think that if you look at Yasiel Puig, right, who his career didn't go the way that we expected it to.
He had a moment, though, didn't he?
He did have a moment. But if you think about that man's story, he came over here on a raft from Cuba. Yeah. Like, he did everything he could to get to the United States to play baseball. And, Vin Scully called him the wild horse. And he did that whole where he'd lick his bat. And I mean, and I think that kind of stuff, I think there's the old school part of me that's like, play the game the right way, and then there's the new school part of me that's like, let's inject some madness into this. And so that's why I loved Puig. That's why I like players like Bryce Harper. I mean, I love Bryce Harper because he's from Las Vegas, but also he's just like mad, he plays hot-headed, and I like that. And so I love the bat flips, not when they're against us, but I love that kind of sass that players are playing with now. But the Dodgers, I think, continue to be I think they continue to set the tone and to pave the way for more international players. And I do consider them to be an international team. I loved the Japan. If you saw the welcome that Kike Hernandez
Yes.
there, I mean, he's such a fan favorite. And so, they continue to pave the way there. And I think that that's great. They're also a storied franchise that if the Dodgers want you, look at Max Muncy. Okay. Max Muncy, we got from the Oakland A's for like a package of peanuts and a BART card. You know what I mean? We got him for nothing. And he's turned out to be one of the best players that the Dodgers have ever had. Same thing with Justin Turner.
Yep.
We absolutely fleeced the Mets for him. And he became like this star. And I think that the Dodgers they have the best coaches, the best training staff, the best facilities, because they invest in it, right? So players Blake Snell has been trying for years to be a Los Angeles Dodger. Now he's here. And he's super stoked about it. And so I think that players are going to continue to want to play for not only a historical franchise, but one that's going to make their game better. So was I sad to see Walker Buehler go? Absolutely. He's a homegrown guy. He's one of my favorite pitchers. He's a righty. If you look at him and Oral Hershiser, their delivery is almost exactly the same, their mechanics when they pitch. Was I sad to see him go? Yes, but he's going to be an ace in Boston. He's going to do so well there. They're going to love him there. Whereas here, if he's still in LA, he's our 4th or 5th starter.
Right.
So I think that guys come to the Dodgers, other teams pick him up, and they are better. Zach McKinstry, classic example. He plays third base for Detroit. He was a Dodger. He was never going to have playing time with us. And so I think that they develop these guys, and they'll play for the Dodgers for a year or so, and then get picked up by a different team, and then they become studs.
The international aspect, I think, this is something that I've long believed when it comes to the NFL's popularity, is there's a weird, like, as far as the mass population goes, there's this weird sort of I want to root for American players thing that goes on in American sports sometimes. And so, like, when you think about the general scope of international athletes in Cuba, the Dominican Republic, they've been pumping out baseball players since the 80s, right? And in South Korea, Japan, really, I feel like in their baseball renaissance from a talent perspective.
Mm-hmm.
African soccer players are getting better and better from Nigeria, Senegal, and Ghana. And now France is having a moment in basketball where a lot of great basketball players are coming from that country.
They are.
And I sometimes look at baseball and the NBA specifically about this, and how many times have I heard complaints about a player needing a translator when they're being interviewed post game, or how many times have, like, the NBA's like, oh, we don't have a face because all the best players are European, So coming from a baseball only perspective, do you think that that's a little bit of a problem, big picture, that a lot of Americans are more resistant to embrace foreign-born players?
I guess not really in my little Dodger bubble, because we have so many foreign-born players.
Because you have Ohtani.
Also, but even before that, like I said, it was, one of my favorite players was Chan-Ho Park too. He was an absolute character. Like, one of the biggest brawls that the Dodgers ever got in, he started, right? Yeah. And so I think for me, that's something that I've never even thought about. Like, so a player needs a translator, so what?
Yeah.
Big fucking deal. Like, I don't know, man. I think that for me personally, and then this is like, I'm on the Dodgers Reddit thread and stuff like that. So they have such a like, their fan base is so across the map. Like
Right.
it's so I don't know if you can see this or not, but
I saw that earlier. I
yeah.
was like, oh, okay, nice. Yeah.
Well, there was one year, and I was at a game with my dad and my grandma, and we were sitting. There was this group of Hispanic girls sitting behind us, and I was sitting back in my seat. I had my arms around my dad and my grandmother, and they saw my tattoo and they like flipped out. They loved it, and they're like, "What are you?" And they wanted to take pictures with me, and they're like, "We love Joanna." It was like this whole thing. And I don't want to be one of those, oh, I don't see color, because that's bullshit. I honor our differences. I want to learn and respect. But it was just one of those things where it's like, it's the great uniter. So I think that English is a hard language to learn. So anybody that speaks English as a second language has my, unmitigated and deep respect, because I can't even pretend to speak a little bit of Spanish. You know what I mean? So I think that that's not something that I've really run into with fans or being irritated about having American-born players. I'm a huge hockey fan. There aren't a ton of American-born hockey players. They're all from Sweden, Russia, Czechoslovakia. They're Canada, Quebec. There's not a lot of American-born players. You saw it I don't know if you watched the Four Nations face-off.
I did, yeah.
So you saw that, like, there hasn't been a Canadian team to win the Stanley Cup, which in my opinion is the hardest trophy to win in sports, in 35 years, right? So it's this whole, I think that I don't, that's just not something I've run into where people are like pissed about. It's not something I've seen in my circles of sports, is people wanting to support just American players or anything like that. I think that is one of the beautiful things about this country that we need to continue to honor, is that we are a melting pot, and we have a lot to learn from one another.
Oh yeah, totally agree with that. To close out here, so Dodgers have started good. A lot of expectations this year.
Yeah.
What is your expectation for this team? How far do you think they can go?
Okay, so there's the emo fan in me that's like, let's win all the World Series ever. And then there's the realistic side that's like, if it's really hard, it's going to be hard to repeat. It's going to be hard to go back to back. So I think I'm hoping that we get to the championship series again. Depends on injuries. The baseball season, as you know, is a marathon. And so we're game 4 into a 162 game set, and we'll see how well our arms hold up. Glasnow has not had a healthy full season. Blake Snell has not had a healthy full season. Yoshinbu Yamamoto, this is his second year, and he was hurt last season. So, and we don't have Shohei pitching yet. He's still the designated hitter. So allegedly he's going to start throwing this summer. We'll see. Clayton Kershaw had a whole bunch of surgeries. He's, I think if he comes back in June or July, I think half a season at this point for my lefty is a good, if he can stay healthy. I think we'll see. It just depends on our guys staying healthy or not. We have a crazy pitching rotation and a super deep bullpen. But it doesn't matter if you get to the dog days and nobody is healthy.
Yep. I guess looking around the National League, who do you view as the Dodgers' biggest threats?
It pains me to say, and my podcast partner, if he listens to this, is going to laugh at me. It's goddamn Padres, man. And I hate them. Like, I don't want them to be our rival, because they're the annoying little brother who's never won anything. And it's like,
right.
To me, our rival is the San Francisco Giants, because both teams were rivals in New York, the Manhattan Giants and the Brooklyn Dodgers. And when the O'Malleys moved the Dodgers from Brooklyn to LA, they went to the owner of the Giants and said, you should move too. And they did. Because they let's keep the rivalry going. That's also why here's a little fun little history fact. I don't know if you know, but that's why the Mets are red and orange, or sorry, blue and orange.
Blue and orange,
is the Dodgers and is from the Brooklyn Dodgers and Manhattan Giants. Is how they honor
both
those franchises. Yes. So for me, like, our rivalry is always going to be the Giants. I will forever hate the Houston Astros. And the Padres just talk a lot of shit for never having won anything. They've never won anything. So until they win a World Series or 8, fine. But yeah, I consider the Padres to be the biggest threat to the Dodgers. Although now that they don't have Jurickson and Profar, they lost a couple of their studs. So we'll see how they do. But Fernando Tatis is always going to be a threat. Machado, even though he's a clown, is always going to be a threat. And behind that, I'd say the marvelous Mets. I mean, they're built to spill, right? So they're looking pretty tough. And then Atlanta, always
in the mix.
Always tough. The Dodgers are sitting atop the National League for sure, but I wouldn't ever count out the Padres, the Phillies, Atlanta, or the stinking Giants.
A fun little tidbit here as we close out is I used to work for Motorola, the phone company, for so many years, and they became jersey patch partners of the Padres a couple years back.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't watch a Padres game anymore because I had to create so many assets and field flyers and stuff with like Padres colors and stuff, and which is like, it's not the greatest color palette in the world,
No.
It's like a day in the desert is their color palette, I would describe it as. But and it clashed so much with our brand colors that, because Moto's brand colors are just like navy, blue, black, white, silver, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I had to create all these things with the Padres logos, and then we had to deal with like their marketing team for like, can we use an image of this player? Which every team is annoying to work with like that. We dealt with the same thing with the Bulls, although the Chicago Bulls, the Bulls were a little bit easier to work with. But yeah, so I can't watch the Padres games from that perspective. So I'm with you on the distaste there. So
I will. I lived in San Diego for a couple of years, so it was always a great place to live. Love the people. Love the city. It's one of the most beautiful cities in the country. I love it there. I love going to games at Petco Park. If you ever get a chance to go to that stadium, it's gorgeous. It's right downtown. It's really nice. Their colors are terrible. That brown and yellow, just blah. But I will say that their city connect jerseys are tight. They have that like that teal and hot pink.
Yeah,
and
that one's good.
Yeah, they look really good. They're done really, really well. If it wasn't San Diego, I'd probably buy one, right? Because I just love the colors so much. But I'll never get behind that team ever. Even if they're in the World Series, like I'm rooting against them. I can't stand them. Them and the Astros, right? Like I'll hate the Astros until I will forever hate the Houston Astros. I'll die on that hill. And for a number of reasons, but yes.
Yeah, that's what's so great about fandom. It's just like you develop this, when you're really invested in a team, you end up developing this deep hatred over, stuff that might not feel like it was a rivalry to begin with, but then, the proximity creates it. You have a moment here or there.
Yeah.
So like I know a friend of mine, he said something nice about the Miami Heat to me once, and I was just like, I refuse to say anything nice about that organization. It's just like, I can't, the hatred was built in me 20 years ago and it hasn't left,
No.
So that's the great thing about fandom. It's a great thing about sports, but JoJo, I appreciate you allocating so much of your time, and we went a little long here, much longer than I usually go, but I thought we had some really awesome conversations. If you could let everybody know where they could follow you and your podcast so they could get more of your opinions on stuff.
I will. So we're on Spreaker, but it's also we're on Spotify as well as iHeart, and it's Good to See You with Coach Karl and Joey Blue. I use Joey Blue as my pseudonym. I've written a book. It's under that name as well. We're recording our our third season, episode 1. We're recording next weekend. So I can send you that link. And if you want to put that out there for your followers, that'd be cool. We're really short. We're 35 minutes. Dodger baseball, other baseball, some sports. He always tries to bait me into talking about fantasy sports, which I won't do. I play fantasy hockey with a group of my girlfriends, and it's really fun. But I don't do fantasy anything else. So he tries to bait me into that, and talking about golf, which I don't like to talk about either. Yeah, so it was really great meeting you. Anytime that you want to reconnect, we can definitely do that. I really enjoyed this. This was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Oh yeah, same here. Just again, an awesome conversation. All of JoJo's links will be in the description of this episode. If you like this podcast, we are on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Until next time, I'm your host, Omar Zaran, and we will see you next week, maybe. I don't know, whenever I record. Bye, everybody.
Bye.